They were very colorful people, great people, fun, brilliant artists, all of them. And then the editors and the assistants. So the bullpen was separate from the group of artists that worked for Marvel. And if you said that the artists were part and the writers were part of the bullpen, it was kind of a disingenuous in that they were part of Marvel, but not part of the bullpen. But the bullpen, you go up, you bring artwork up, because there was no FedEx back then. Oh God, that's so old. You'd bring artwork up, deliver pages, and then you'd hang out all afternoon and go out for a couple of drinks if it was a Friday. Play softball if it was a Friday. So that was the fun part of it, and you actually looked forward to bringing pages up. It was great. But the groups of artists and writers were not part of the literal bullpen.
Okay. Bob, did you ever, how did you like interact then with Marvel, with the people in the offices and all that?
Well, you kind of didn't for a while. You brought your, like you said, you brought your stuff in. When I was first starting, I kind of avoided talking to people because I was always late at first. But eventually, when Jim Shooter took over, there were no assistant editors, and for a while there were these things called writer editors, where people edited their own books. So of course they were constantly behind, and got later and later. And when Shooter took over, he said, "Well, we need sub-editors to get things back on time," and called me and asked me if I'd be an editor, and I said no. And being Jim, he thought I was negotiating, so he kept offering me more money until I finally said yes. But I really didn't want to do it because I thought, oh my God, I understand that if things are late, I'm going to have to like fire people and stuff like that, which turned out to be true. But the big thing about it was you got to really work every day with people that were in the bullpen, like Marie and
John, oh my God, I forgot his last name. Tartaglione, the art assistant, the corrections guy.
Yeah.
He would do art corrections. There was lettering corrections, art corrections, coloring corrections, and they were all in the bullpen.
They were all in the bullpen, and there were people like Jack Abel had a desk. The world's greatest tinker.
Vinny Galetta?
Well, Vinny would come into the office.
Senate? Yeah.
Giacoya, Frank Giacoya.
Frank Giacoya was on staff, that's right.
And Giacoya was on staff, and you could go in and watch him. He would be doing stuff like, you know, drawing a straight line with a brush and that kind of stuff that these people had done it for so long, and they were so good. And it was, I learned more about doing comics from that 6 months that I agreed to do it than I had ever learned. It was quite wonderful, and they were colorful, wonderful. Irv Watanabe.
Yeah. Stu Schwartzberg.
And who was the wonderful guy? There's this little fire plug of a guy who. Danny Crespi, yes. And
these are all production people.
And they were all just wonderful. They were really, really great. Except sometimes Vinny wasn't, but that's. But he was one of the most colorful guys.
Now, you mentioned Giacoya. That's where I got the name Junior from. I'm not literally a junior. He called me derisively, he called me Junior. He said, go get a job, Junior. And I found a job, and I think it pissed him off because I worked for Marvel after that. That's where the Junior came from, Frank.
Breaking news at Dragon Con, we now know where the Junior came from.
Yeah, just briefly, some of these people were like, you know, when I first started, you're trying to work, you think it's going to work one way, and then it's eight. You say, well, that isn't what I had in mind. And it was a while, it was Frank Giacoya, I remember something of mine and said, oh, okay, somebody can actually make my stuff look good. That's fantastic. And it really, that day is fantastic. That somebody worked 8 years and he's like, yes, okay, it's kind of working now.
Well, I predate all these guys, and when I came up there and started working, Marvel was going from like 8 books a month to about 20-something, and so basically they were hiring anybody who came across the state line and could hold a pencil. I barely qualified, so they made me the art director.
I was Marvel's first
facto art director.
I
up
didn't know
there.
that, that's great.
Beat your dad by at least one generation. Frank Giacoya took over when they finally gave me a book to do. But I'd come in there in the morning and pull out all the Xeroxes and do cover sketches and wait for Stan to show up at noon, and then he would go, terrific, but, and I'd redo the sketches. And when I finally got off that, Frank took over, and I think he lasted about 2 months, and then your dad took over.
Yeah, yes. that's
So
right.
that was my bullpen experience.
Awesome.
I've got about 30 seconds of bullpen experience. I won the Marvel Trial Contest and it got me a trip to New York, and I'm from down here. And, I'm not originally from, been here forever. And so they flew me to New York, and I was there for 3 days, and I was thinking I was gonna get a job at Marvel Comics, because it was in New York. And the last day I was there, I was in Romita's Raiders, is what it was called then, doing art corrections and things like that, thinking, I'm gonna fly home with nothing. And, but it was cool to be there, because the offices were like crowded, and they were dirty, and there were filing cabinets, and there was papers on every wall and every office, and it was really, really exciting to be there. And they did give me a job, so.
It could have been sitcom, it could have been sitcom.
It could
about
have.
that office.
You know, that's the one thing that missed now with digital and everything. You go to the offices now, it looks like any corporate office here.
Yeah.
There's nothing there, you know?
Yeah, when I showed up, it was about the quarter the size of this room, the entire office.
Mark, while you mentioned that, this blew my mind. I was doing research a couple of weeks ago for this panel, and I was looking at your biography. I didn't know all of this, but it noted that it was the involvement of Cliff Biggers from the comic shop involved in you doing the tryout thing. A good friend of mine used to buy comics from him when I lived in Atlanta for a long time. And then you drew the New Warriors for Fate Initiates, a good friend of mine, just saw him Dragon Con last year. And then you did Amazing Spider-Man with David Michelini, dear friend of mine, got me into writing. And then Thunderbolts.
It's all about you, isn't it?
It's all about me. I'm just astonished at all these connections. I'm like, how did I never meet Mark when I meet everybody around him?
I don't get out much. It's probably good for everybody.
You guys all, some of you write also, but you all have done art over the years. So I want to kind of go back early to the beginnings. I'll start with you, Mark, down there this time. What first attracted you to art, and what first got you started into drawing and into comics?
Oh God, I was like 6 or 7 years old when I saw my first comic, and we were coming back from Hawaii. My dad was in the service, and we pulled in. We were driving across country with no air conditioning. We were in Texas in the summertime, and we pulled in and bought warm Dr. Peppers and some comic books, and I was hooked. I had 5 brothers and a sister. None of them ever read a comic in their lives. My twin brother, I took him to the Avengers movie, and he bought his first house. I owned like 4 homes. You know, he's never married. I've been married my entire life. Very fraternal. So we're leaving the movie, and he goes, "So Mike, you like the movie?" Mike goes, "Yeah, I like the movie." That's my twin brother. He says, "Yeah." I got a couple of questions though. I says, "Yeah." So at the end of the movie, the guy with the hammer, he goes home. And my wife and I are like, "The guy with the effing hammer?" What? So yeah, I was the kid in the basement just drawing funny books, wanting this is all I wanted to do, which is not usually a good idea. You know, figure out what you want to do when you're 9. But it's worked out. So, you know, what was the question again?
What attracted you to art?
I just came to it natural. I don't have a single artistic person in my family, except I've got a 3rd cousin, my mother's cousin, Jay. He did the original Coppertone ad, the painting for with the girl on a beach with the dog pulling down the back of the baby. He did the original painting of that.
Wow.
He had an art agency in Atlanta for years here, and he wouldn't hire me because I didn't do art agency stuff. But I just did. My parents didn't know what to do with me. I mean, my dad would bring home stacks of Xerox paper, used Xerox paper, that I would draw on the back side. You know, and I would copy John, and I'd copy Jim, and I'd copy you, and Bob, and, you know, I'd copy everybody, because, you know, I got very few art lessons, but, like I said, it's worked out.
My story is rather similar in the fact that I was around 8 years old and looking through an adventure comic book, and in the background, back then nobody signed their work. You had no idea who these people were that were working on these things, but Lee Elias, who had been doing Green Arrow, I think it was, on the splash panel, he snuck his name in some foliage. And I saw that and I went, people do this.
Was that the first, that was the first artist that signed?
That's the first one I
artwork?
ever saw.
Yeah.
And at that point, my dad was a draftsman at Chrysler, and he figured part of his fringe benefits was at the end of the day to stuff as much tracing paper, masking tape, and number 2 pencils into his briefcase as he could walk out with. He had this idea he was going to use it for his woodworking hobby. I discovered I could trace off the comic book characters, and that was the beginning of my drawing. It was tracing off Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and whoever.
Anybody ever use carbon paper?
Taping it on.
Instead of tracing,
If you're gonna trace out somebody, you must have traced out those guys.
It's
Yeah, that was filthy.
I guess I got started when I was about 4 years old. I was very ill briefly, and apparently I was vomiting blood and stuff, and they didn't know what was wrong, so they took me to the hospital, and they put me in a private room because they didn't, in the kids ward, but they didn't know what was wrong with me. And the next day I felt fine, but they, did the test, said, no, you're still sick. So I was active and jumping around on the bed and stuff, and they started bringing me stuff to pacify me, including comic books, which I couldn't quite read yet. But I kept looking through them, and I got this huge stack. There were stuff that if my mother had ever seen some of them, she wouldn't have let me read them, but there was also, I remember there were Donald Duck comic, it was not Uncle Scrooge yet, it was Karl Barks's first thing, Pirate Gold. It was the first duck comic that he did, and that was part of the stack. They were gonna run some more tests on me. This was after about 3 days there, and a nurse noticed that I was scratching behind one ear as they were starting to wheel me out for the tests. And she looked and she said, "Oh my God, you have measles." And apparently I had something called intestinal measles, and they had started coming out. And he said, the doctor came and looked and said, "Yes, you got measles. You're going to be fine. We know what it is now. They're coming out. You're going to be fine. And by the way, you're now very contagious. You must leave immediately. You've got to take all those comic books with you." And that was the beginning of the ruination of my life.
My story is always related to my father, but not in that he taught me anything. It was more watching. Middle of the night in Queens, New York, they had these tiny little houses, and second floor there would be a pull down attic door. You pull it down, fold it out, and walk up to the attic. That's where my father worked. And the monsters were under my bed one night, and they were going to kill me. So I woke up crying like a little kid and pulled the ladder down, and I walked up. And my father had been doing romance comics for as long as I could remember, so my brother and I couldn't give a damn about it. But I walked up crying, and he sat there and he just did this as he was drawing, waved me in. And tears are coming down, and he's working on Daredevil number 12 with Kazar in the tree and the plunderers guys surrounding Daredevil. He was inking Jack's pencils, Jack Kirby's pencils. And I stopped for a second to look at what he was doing, and he does this. And I sat down where I normally sat down, and he said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Dad, the monsters." And he says, "Okay, well, let's talk about this." And he points to what he's doing, because he said it was different. And I asked, "What is it?" And he explained, "This is a superhero. This guy's kind of like Tarzan, and these are all bad guys. And I said, "Dad, the superhero's going to get killed." "No, the superhero's going to beat the crap out of these guys." And oh, by the way, he's blind. My head exploded, and I apparently sat down and started drawing right then and there, because he was patiently explaining to me about superheroes. At that point, I'd only seen romance comics and a lot of people naked. And that was when I was hooked. And apparently, my father told me I started drawing on the floor, because there was no paper right there. So I was scratching on the floor, and the monsters disappeared, and they never came back. And I was drawing from that point on. And he patiently spoke to me. He just sat there and spoke to me for about an hour and a half. And I didn't have to go to school because I was terrified.